Story 1. About 7 or so years ago, I was living in an apartment complex with my wife and a few roommates. It was one of those places that had just enough parking spaces for the residents, so parking could be tight. When someone, say, parked over 2 spots or parked very close to the line, people took notice. In this complex, we had maybe 3 or 4 handicap spaces. A few were in the front, and one next to each walkway entering the complex in the back. Our apartment was closer to the back where one of these spots was located. We did not need the handicap space. The handicap space was right next to a walkway, which led to the entire right side of the complex. The walkway doubled as the van access space for the handicap spot next to it. For a few weeks, this one guy, let's call him Bob, parked in the marked off van access space with his very expensive car. Bob would park so far up the ramp that you had to step up the curb and onto the grass to get around his car. He was treating it like his personal parking space. People didn't park there for a very good reason. Since it was the major walkway for half the complex, people carried groceries and via that path,
Moved in and out via that path.
and generally used that path to get to the parking lot. Moreover, most of us knew that one of the apartments right next to that ramp belonged to a little old lady who had to use oxygen canisters. We knew this from seeing her and the sign bolted into the wall next to her front door saying as much, fully within view of the walkway. She had lived there so long that the handicap space back there was labeled hers. I personally saw her struggle to get around the car once, as well as other people moving boxes or furniture. None of this even fazed Bob. He kept parking there and ignored everyone else's problems. We complained to the office, who just told us to call the tow truck. We called the tow truck, and they didn't show. Bob continued to treat the ramp as his personal, private, exclusive parking lot for his quite new, quite expensive-looking car. One day, while going out to eat with my wife and roommates, Bob was parked there again. All 4 of us were upset by it and made a few comments. We got into our car, still discussing Bob's odd behavior. I had placed the key into the ignition and was ready to start the car when I remembered something. There was something in my trunk. Something bad. I opened the door and got out. My wife called to me, "Hey, what are you doing? What are you doing?" She knew something was up, but I wasn't ready to confess yet. She might try to stop me. I opened the trunk and found it. It was a Tupperware container with a leftover lunch of ham, potato, and cheese casserole. Not the best meal my wife had made, and she admits it. She hadn't made it since. But when she made it 6 months before, I took it to work and ended up eating something else, after which I promptly forgot the Tupperware in my trunk. It had percolated there for 6 months through one of the hottest summers our area had ever had. Every time we saw it in there, we'd grimace and comment on how we needed to throw it out. But we didn't, as if we instinctively knew it had a higher purpose. The weapon, because it could only be that anymore, sloshed with what I thought could have been water in the Tupperware as I walked to Bob's car. I stopped in front of his car, standing on the walkway. I popped the lid open and almost vomited at the smell. I turned my head and took a deep breath through my mouth. The air held a tang that I could only assume was still part of the weapon. I steeled myself, moved my arm out to the side, and threw the contents of the weapon toward the hood of the car like I was sowing the seed of sweet revenge. The thing I remember best about the next few moments is that the contents that came out of the weapon did make a splash sound. A wet thud was what I heard. It struck the hood, dead center. The momentum carried the sludge up the hood and onto the windshield, then slid back down onto the wipers and air intake. I took the now empty container and hurried away, still holding my breath. I found the closest dumpster and threw it inside. Only once I was halfway back to the car where my wife and roommates were did I take a breath. I got into the car grinning like an idiot. My wife asked again, "What did you do?" echoed by a roommate while the other said, "Should we be worried?" I just said, "We should go." My wife responded, "Oh gosh," roommate 1. "Reg, what did you do?" Roommate 2. Nervous giggle. We went and got our food. While doing that, I explained what I had done to them. We headed back and parked in a space a bit farther away from where we had before. We took our usual route back to the apartment out of habit, which took us toward Bob's special parking space. In hindsight, we shouldn't have done that. I saw Bob on his cell phone looking at his car. I spun on my heels and started walking the other way, right past my wife and roommates. They looked at me confused and asked where I was going. I said nothing and just kept going. They followed me to another route into the complex that was much farther away, but gave us a clear look at Bob from behind as we got close to our apartment. Bob was talking to someone, and it was very clear he was not happy. I never got close enough to hear what he said. I just quietly and quickly opened the apartment door. Before I was able to go inside, I saw Bob get into his car and drive off. I can only assume to clean off the mess I had sprayed over his car. I sometimes wonder if he thinks someone did that on purpose or if someone just got really sick, like Centers for Disease Control level sick. After that, Bob never parked in his special space again, and it remained open for as long as we lived there. Story 2. I want to start off by saying that I work in a hospital, so due to this and the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, I will be altering the names of all the characters in our little play. With that being said, I happen to work security for a hospital in the town I live in. Let's call it Loserton. We are contracted out by our employer to the local hospitals. Usually, we have 3 shifts, 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., 2 p.m. to 10 p.m., and my shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. During my shift, we usually have homeless individuals come in saying they are hurt, but in reality, they just want some sleep in the rooms. This is actually all right, except because of the COVID-19 pandemic. The nursing staff is not having it. This is not as important because our main player, Karen the old hag, always comes in on the ambulance. Whenever she comes in, she stays for about 3 hours, gets discharged, and then sits in the waiting room. We are always called to escort her off, and it always ends up with the police being called on her. She always has the same excuse. I can't walk. I do not have kneecaps. You try walking without kneecaps. This goes on and on. To be fair to her, she does walk with a cane. However, we always remind her that she did just walk from her bed to the waiting room, and the nursing staff was walking with her to make sure she did not fall. Whenever she feels like she is going to lose her battle, she will throw her cane at anyone close to her and throw herself on the ground. Mind you, this lady is like 87 years old, and she acts more like a child than my 3-year-old niece. During the night, we had a hold for a patient that was prone to hurting themselves. We just sit outside the room to make sure they do not either hurt themselves or make a run for it. It is policy that involuntary holds cannot leave until our mental health team finds them a bed anywhere. We always alternate every 2 hours to make sure none of us get burned out. Plus, we have these things called posts where we are supposed to be for 2 hours anyway. Karen came in on the ambulance as per her usual. Mind you, it was raining heavily, so when the ambulance picked her up, she was soaked from head to toe. According to the nurses, she was also very drunk. Karen plus alcohol equals 1000% Krabby Pants Ultra Godzilla. Once she gets into her room, Glenda, the good nurse, might as well go all out here, walks in and gets her vitals and asks what happened. The emergency room technician, Bob the builder, starts to get her the scrubs you get issued to change into. Karen throws a fit. She yells at the nurses because Bob the builder is male, and she claims that earlier that night she was assaulted, so she does not want any male persons near her. Understandable. They oblige. The only problem now is that she is falling back on her I have no kneecaps excuse, so she does not have to wear her scrubs. Great. Let's just stay naked and let the entire emergency room see you. Lady. Midway through the shift, our newer officer called over the radio for us to come into the emergency room for a disruptive patient. We had no idea that Karen was in the hospital until me and old guy walked back there. We walked to the monitor. Technician, who has been working in healthcare for like 60 years, Mrs. Nancy, who looks at us with the, I'm going to lose it. You better stop me look. Old guy says, what is going on, Mrs. Nancy? And then we heard it. I am not putting on my clothes because I can't. I can't bend my knees. Karen, you have to put your clothes on. No, are you going to put them on me? I do not want you touching me. Old guy and I just looked at each other, rolled our eyes, and sighed heavily. He went to talk to her, and I stayed outside the room providing cover. I talked to the nurses and found out what had happened. I thought nothing of it, so I waited until old guy was done talking to her. Once he was done, Mrs. Nancy wanted us to walk around the emergency room every 30 minutes or so. Shift is almost over, and it is now my turn to sit on the hold. I am about 3 beds down when she starts screaming and hollering once she got the discharge paperwork. This is basically the emergency room stating, we have done everything and diagnosed, and we recommend that you are stable enough to go home. Well, Karen was not having any of this. I get on the radio and call for the rest of the officers to come back to the emergency room. They walk up to me, ask what is going on, and all I do is point to the room she is in and say, Might need to handle that. Sure enough, she decided she was not leaving and threw her cane at Glenda, the good nurse. Because this happened, policy dictates that when a patient strikes a staff member, local law enforcement is called. Not a minute goes by, and 4 squad cars pull up with lights and sirens blaring. This was funny to me because they just casually walked in like, "Hey guys, I heard you needed us." Once they heard her screaming, Officer Bigby looks at the staff and just asks, "Is that the Karen?" "Yep." "You gotta be kidding me." He proceeds to rip open the curtain and, at the top of his lungs, "Karen, get out right now before I take you to jail." Karen is not budging, though. She argues back and forth with the officer about how she was assaulted, how she cannot walk, how she cannot bend her knees, and how she cannot get her pants on. They even gave her the option to put the gown on. Officer Bigby nonchalantly states, "Karen, I saw you walking not 6 hours ago. Why are you like this?" "You are a freaking liar," Karen tells him. Fun fact, you can call cops a lot of different things. I know because I used to be a deputy in the other K-state. Pig, weirdo, coward, baby killer, we can take it in stride. But you do not call us liars and think you are about to win an argument. So you're telling me that my body camera, the dash cam, and the rear dash on my patrol vehicle are lying? No, that is not what I'm saying. I am saying you are a liar. She was told that she had been discharged, and if she refused to leave, she would be charged with trespassing and disorderly conduct. It took all of 30 seconds for all 4 officers to go into that room, handcuff her, and place the gown on her body for transport. They threw all her belongings into bags, and she was escorted outside. Old guy came and relieved me from my post, and as I walked by the ambulance entrance doors, I could see the cops laughing and talking about their next post while she was in the back of the squad car with her head down, muttering to herself. Honestly, as many times as we have to deal with her, it is nice when she leaves. It gets really silent at night, and that is the way we like it. They are now working on a warrant for repeated trespassing and harassment of hospital employees. Story 3. Background. Long story short, 2 years ago, my white 50-year-old father bought a Vietnamese restaurant, which we had been going to for years. Every Wednesday, my father and I get together for lunch at his restaurant. On busy days, we will walk in and clear off a table by the kitchen, which is usually covered in extra sauces and chili oils, and seat ourselves. This is also where staff sit when they eat on their breaks. On numerous occasions, we have had customers make snide comments, tell us we cannot do what we are doing, etc. Usually, not a big deal, and people hesitantly accept that my dad really is the owner based on staff reactions. We have had the occasional person who comes in and refuses to believe that a white guy can own a Vietnamese restaurant. I think my favorite was when an Asian woman finally just accused my dad of bribing a waitress to get a table ahead of the Asian woman's party. Silly, I know. My dad just went, "That is exactly what I did. In fact, I bribe everyone here every week." The Asian lady did not understand he was talking about paying out the staff's paychecks, but I was laughing really hard.